السلام عليكم مرحبا بكم في قناة Forex.
In this section I'm going to show you how to draw trend lines, and this is my way of drawing trend lines, and it's a way I think you may enjoy actually exploring. But one thing I will say is I don't believe there is a wrong way to draw a trend line. So whatever feels best to you is what I encourage you to actually apply. But I would like to show you some very basic approaches to drawing trend lines. Now the most common way to actually draw trend lines is very simple. It's simply connecting two extremes, two highs in this instance, in a way to identify resistance as the line provided here. Now another way to actually draw trend lines that people do is connecting lows, and then an effort to identify potential support. And to kind of give you a better idea of that approach, let me bring over another chart. Here's a price chart of Google. And if you simply connect the lows here, you'd be very surprised what actually develops when I extend that trend line. Excuse the pop-up. As you can see, this one little trend line we drew between the lows in 04 and the lows in 05 actually was consistent and provided support for a number of instances, for a number of retracements or counter trend moves within the advance that we've seen in Google since then. Here was one area where our initial trend line we drew provided support, as well as here, here, and again here. So, again, one way to actually draw a trend line is simply connecting the lows. It's a very basic approach, very simple approach, yet as you can see in this example, a very, very dynamic approach. Let me clean this price chart up. Now there's another thing that you can do with trend lines with regard to actually when you're drawing them from low to low. Oftentimes what I'd like to do is identify the actual extremes, the low extremes within a move, and then take a parallel. I use parallel lines quite a bit, and I'll show you why later on, but in this example here, if you simply draw a trend line from the lows that we've seen within the advance in Google, and take a parallel of that line off the extreme, the highest we've seen, you can see that the most recent peak we've seen in Google, this upper line actually did provide resistance. And again, it was just a very simple trend line drawn on the lows and extended upward in the form of a parallel line off the most extreme. Now one thing that I would like to show you, or actually two things, here was where the upper boundary line provided resistance of our trend line, but also to note that we had there was another area, another use for this trend line. Notice the midpoint of this trend line provided resistance here, again here, and also here. And this is one reason why I like to draw the parallel lines so much, and when I do, I like to include the center point or the midline. Let me clean the price chart up a bit. And let me bring over another price chart. This price chart is of coffee. And again, I've already drawn a trend line on here. And I simply just connected these two extremes here. And you can see how useful it was in providing support here, as well as for the most recent bounce. Now again, I do not believe that there is an incorrect way to actually draw a trend line. And as I said previously, the significance of the line is directly proportional to the importance of the two extremes you draw the line between. And let me bring up another chart here for you real quick. I'd like to actually show you something with regard to actually two price charts. I want to pull up a Cotton Weekly. And again, just show you how useful the trend lines can be. Now here was back in 2001, 2002, we had two extremes here. And again, I just simply like to connect the lows and then take a parallel off the extremes of the price move. But the point on drawing this chart or bringing up this price chart is to actually show you how two little lines, this line in particular here, let me highlight that so it stands out just a bit more. These two lows, two extremes, a simple trend line drawn between those two lines, identified recent resistance in cotton. So this is one of the best reasons I can actually recommend drawing trend lines, is because a trend line drawn some months ago, some days ago, some weeks ago, even some years ago, you would be surprised at how applicable they still are today. This one little trend line here we drew from this low here to this low here actually was in effect on more than one occasion. Notice the resistance here it provided, and here, as well as here. And again, most recently, when we've been trading about the 65 level. Now, this is a cotton weekly chart. So you can have a lot of fun with trend lines, and they can do quite a bit with regard to identifying support and resistance, and likely areas places will actually reverse in price. Now here's the dollar index, and I'd simply again like to draw a line, simple trend line connecting two lows. These two lows, but I'd like to take this line off the most recent high. Now what you'll be able to see from this approach is that in this instance, the midpoint or the center point of the line provided support, and the upper line provided resistance. Trend lines are probably the most simplest analytical tool that you can actually apply when doing your analysis, be it a stock, currency, commodity, yet they're very effective, more so than people actually realize. Here's just another example. One thing that I find, and I speak about more extensively later on, is that many times counter trend or corrective price action will be contained by two lines. And it's typically just simply a parallel taken off two extremes. These can be two highs or two lows off two extremes. Oftentimes it'll provide support, and you'll see prices either reverse at the lower boundary line or the center line. And as you can see in this instance, the lower boundary line did indeed provide good support for a subsequent move up in prices. Now here's a neat little trick I'd like to show you too. Let me bring over another price chart. Here we can use lines a number of different ways. We can connect these two lows, and that would actually identify the point of a breakout here. And as you can see later on, it provided support at this level when we came back and tested the upper portion of that line. That's one way you can draw the trend lines on this price chart. Or another way, we can connect the highs and take it from the intervening low here. And as you can see, this was soybean weekly, the reversal that occurred in price at the lower boundary line. Now, many of the lines that I've drawn thus far have been from high to highs, taking parallels off intervening lows, or they've been from low to low, taking another parallel. Well, that's not the only way to actually draw trend lines. You can draw a trend line, really, it's only limited to your imagination. And again, I do not believe that there's an incorrect way to actually draw a trend line. Again, it simply depends on the importance of the 2 points that you actually draw the line. Case in point, let me bring up another chart here. I'd like to show you a little occurrence back here. Now, we connected this low here to that low. And as you can see, let me expand the price chart out a bit. It provided support in Google for the subsequent advance. Right here. But there was also another way to actually identify support in this stock without drawing the traditional low-to-low move. You could have drawn the trend line simply by connecting the highs, and again taking the parallel off the intervening low here. And again, as you can see, we indeed have support. So there's a number of ways to actually draw trend lines, and there's again not an incorrect way.
شكرا لك على مشاهدة الفيديو. من فضلك ضع لايك واشتراك في القناة تشجيعا لنا على تقديم الأفضل في القادم إن شاء الله.